I was Toki's vet. I was the head vet at Miami Seaquarium in the 90s.
How long did you work there?
I worked there for 5 years in the 90s, but since then I've been a consulting vet and I've been off and on her vet for the last 30 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And most recently, just a few months ago, but I resigned over this issue.
Wow.
Yes.
Very interesting. Just going back to your time with her at this aquarium, what types of issues was she having then, or what was her health like when she was under your care?
During my time and for the last 20 years, she was one of the healthiest cetaceans, marine mammals that I've ever cared for. She never got sick. She's very, very, very healthy. Now she's older. She's 60, we assume around 60 years old. And like any mammal, human, dog, you know, when you get older, you start getting some issues. And she's had some recently, but during my time, before this most recent time, she was a very healthy animal.
What are the challenges just in general in keeping such a large mammal like an orca healthy and well mentally and physically in a, aquarium environment?
Well, the number one challenge is her size. She's estimated to be close to 7,000 pounds, so there's not an X-ray machine or an MRI or a CAT scan or anything that can penetrate her size, her girth. We do use ultrasound. She's trained for every type of sample you could imagine: blood, urine, blowhole sample, stomach sample. So we rely mostly on that, but a lot of the imaging and diagnostics and a stethoscope is useless with an animal that's that big. So it's very challenging. The other one being that they're in the water. That's a big challenge because I can't really do much with her in the water from a medical standpoint. So we rely on trained behaviors, and if she gets very ill, which has happened recently, either drain the water or there's some places where we could raise the pool bottom so we don't have to deal with the water to take care of her. Then we can give her medication, we can give her antibiotic injections if she needs to. When they're healthy, we give them vitamins, pills, medicines in their fish. But of course, if they're sick, they may not want to eat, or she may not want to eat, and there's no way to treat her.
Yeah, one thing that somebody brought up, and I have no idea if this is true or not, but are these animals given any kind of like anti-anxiety medicine or something to make them more docile and tranquil?
Not ever during my time, I can tell you, that I've known her. Now, if we felt some medication was necessary, we would use the same criteria you would in a human. And there used to be a stigma with anxiety meds and antidepressants. That's no longer the case, at least hopefully it's not. People don't have to feel like there's something wrong with them because they take an antidepressant. So personally, that's a whole other topic, but that wouldn't be wrong if she needed it. But in my experience with her, no, she's never needed anything like that. So the idea being that drugged to be happy in their environment or in their pool, no, that's not the case, at least not ever when I was her vet.
Okay, good to know. It's come out in some reports, and some of the activists have pointed to her conditions at this aquarium. They say dirty water, rotten fish, stuff like that. An old aquarium as well. What was your take on her living situation when you were there? Did you have concerns about it, or did it seem sufficient?
There's always been concerns about the size of her pool, mainly. The good news is it's chilled. In the old days, facilities tried to keep killer whales in pools that weren't chilled. So right from the start, as far as I'm aware, ever since I was there, even back in the 90s, her water was chilled to 55, 50 degrees, which is number one. It's disinfected water, so it's clean, there's no bacteria in it. But the size has always been an issue, and we'll talk about that more again with the plan that's in place now. We all wish she were given a bigger pool way back in the day, but this is the pool she's lived in for 50 years now, and it's all she knows. And again, I'm happy to talk more about that.
Well, tell me why you think she should stay here or go to another aquarium.
So this is her home. 1970, she's been here since 1970. So do the math, 50 plus years she's been in that pool. And even though it's not the greatest killer whale pool on the planet, it's her home. It's all she's ever known. She was taken from the wild at 5 years old. and put here. And she doesn't know wild orcas, she doesn't know wild environment, wild conditions, she knows that pool. That's her home. So I think it's very important for people to understand that. If you think you're doing the right thing by taking her from there to a sea pen in the Pacific Northwest, might not be as great as you think it is, because that's her home. That's all she's known for 50 years. And again, it's not any different with people or dogs or pets. You know, when they get used to something, and dogs don't live 50 years somewhere. People do, and when you change the environment, it's not good. So I have very, very strong concerns about her ability to survive the trip and the living conditions out there, because it's very different, and I can give you a lot of examples on why.
As best you're aware, have any orcas ever died in transport?
Free Willy. So not in transport, but Free Willy from the movie, the whale that was beloved by everybody because of that movie. Free Willy is dead. And Free Willy is dead because they did what they want to do with Lolita or Toki. They brought him back to Iceland, native waters. He lived in a pool, not even as long as Toki. He was only 27 years old. But they brought him there. The idea was to live in a sea pen, but of course that wasn't the end of it. There were sea walks. They wanted him to learn to hunt and feed on his own. He never did. He was begging from boats. And then when he got sick, they had no way to care for him. Because like I said earlier, we could drop the water, we could raise the bottom, we could treat her, we can give her what she needs. IV fluids, we can give her antibiotics. Unfortunately, Free Willy's name was Keiko, like Lolita's Toki or Tokitae. So Keiko unfortunately died because they couldn't care for him when he got sick. And he did not forage on his own. He was not able to catch food. There's a book out that I urge all the listeners or viewers to read called Killing Keiko, from a guy who was there, a colleague during that, who was there for his best interest to try to make it go as smoothly as possible, and he wrote a book called Killing Keiko. And it pretty much chronicles the events leading up to Keiko's death. So I'm going to repeat it again because it's a strong message. Free Willy is dead. The last thing I want, or any of us want that know her, is to have her suffer that same fate, and that's our fear. Move her out of that pool, her home, the environment she knows, to a sea pen. The writing's on the wall. She's not going to stay in that sea pen, I guarantee it, even if she were to survive it, which is a whole other story. Managing a sea pen that can contain a 7,000-pound whale in the open ocean is not easy. And you know darn well, like as I said, writing's on the wall. The next step is going to be relentless pressure to take her out like Keiko on sea walks, introduce her to her family, and she's going to die. That's not going to be in her best interest. She has lived in chlorinated, ozonated, disinfected pool water, which is a good thing for pathogens. Going to natural seawater, she's going to be exposed to things that she's never been exposed to before. She's going to get sick from them. There's bacteria, there's organisms in that water that are going to make her sick because she's naive to them. And like I said, I have a lot of concern about how they're going to treat her when she gets sick in a sea pen. But there's another side of it. The whole idea is to bring her back to her family, the southern resident orcapod in the Pacific Northwest. Similarly, she's been exposed to things here that they haven't been exposed to. So there are pathogens, human bacteria or any bacteria. She's been on antibiotics, superbugs, resistant bacteria, viruses that those whales have never encountered. They're endangered. The population of those whales is listed as endangered. They're in trouble, they're dying, they're not reproducing as much as they need to sustain, and now the idea would be to bring her to them and threaten them with the pathogens that she has. So if she, forget about release and sea walks, even the sea pen is going to be in their vicinity. They're going to come visit her. That's the whole idea. They want them to interact. That's putting an endangered pod of orcas, wild orcas that are already in trouble, at more risk. So she's a risk to them, which I don't think a lot of people understand.
Yeah, and there's not enough food for those orcas
Right.
as is, so that's a really interesting
You're aware of the situation.
point.
Yeah, it's not a good scenario for the wild orcas. They're in trouble already. So, you know, you like to think of the population over the individual, but of course we all love Toki. We want what's best for her. But that is a strong argument too, whether you like Toki or not. You know, the wild population is important, and it makes no sense to me why we would pose any extra risk to that population that's already in danger.
Do you think the plan to get her released could hit hurdles with federal permits because of that risk?
I hope so.
I mean, they would be the ones to assess
Yeah,
that.
National Marine Fisheries Service is the governmental agency that protects the wild orcas. All of us, the other people you're going to talk to today, everybody that knows Lolita, that's pretty much our only hope, is that it'll stop there when it's realized how much of a risk she can be to the wild population, that they should be protected. That's what National Marine Fisheries is there for, to protect that population. She's included as part of them now, which is a whole other thing. But the bottom line is they need to protect that population. So I would hope this is not approved.
So is it feasible for her to be moved to SeaWorld? I know that has been talked about, but there's also been talk that they wouldn't want Lolita because they might get backlash and they don't want her to die there under their watch. What do you think?
Well, I was a SeaWorld vet for many years, so I know a little bit about SeaWorld, and it would be a great place for her for the same reasons I mentioned earlier. They can care for her. They have pools that have false bottoms that could come up when she gets sick. They have expert veterinarians and staff to take care of her, the people like she's used to dealing with. But I don't know. I haven't talked to SeaWorld about this. I think number one for me and for a lot of us would be millions of dollars are going to be spent on an ill-fated plan that's going to kill Lolita. So millions of dollars will be wasted, just like Free Willy. Millions of dollars were wasted, Free Willy's now dead. So why spend millions of dollars for an ill-fated plan where she's going to die? Redirect that money to do something here. If her pool's not adequate, fix it, renovate it. When my home needs stuff, I renovate it. If it's beyond renovation, build a new home for her. If that's not possible, then sure, SeaWorld would be a great option.
I feel like since she's no longer performing, she's kind of not necessarily an asset to the aquarium anymore, so it's kind of in their financial interest to get rid of her. And you know, I feel like the times we live in also, she's become a symbol of captive animals being returned to their home environments.
Well, you would think Keiko, Free Willy would have been the precedent. You would think after that, we wouldn't be even talking about this anymore. And like I said, he was only 27 years old. She's 60. And one thing, and this is published, there's literature on it from Keiko's release and from other marine mammal releases. It's not like we're against releasing marine mammals or sea pens. I'm all for them. But there are candidates that make sense. Time in captivity is number one, or time in human care. 50 years is unprecedented. So animals that come in for rehabilitation, you know, we treat them because they're sick in the wild, we release them. We do that all the time. I do that all the time. If somebody said, hey, there's a killer whale that's been in this pool, small pool, not great conditions for a year, 2 years, sure, sea pen would be a great idea. 50 years in that pool, that's all she knows. It's just, she's not a good candidate. Simple as that.
One of the more maybe emotional arguments would be, you know, would we rather see her die in a small pool or die in the wild where she was born? What do you say to that?
Well, death is a strong word. I'll redirect that a little bit, and I would say I'd like her to live out the rest of her life in her home. The place she's called home for 50 years. The place she knows best. She's not stressed. She's content in that pool. I know that whale very well. I've known her for 30 years. She wouldn't have lived this long if it was horrible conditions, as people are saying. So I think whether she lives a year, 10 years, 20 years, that's where she should live out the rest of her life. Bring her over there, it's just going to be a matter of time, and she's not going to die from old age or what she'll die from here. She's going to die because of the conditions and the fact that she's not a good candidate for that plant.
Is there anything else about this we haven't spoken about that you want to say or that you want people to know?
Well, you mentioned that she is a symbol, and she really is, and I think we have to recognize that. I remember the first time I met Lolita. It was in 1989, and it gave me chills, and it still gives me chills now when I see her, think about her. She's an awesome, impressive animal. Have you ever met her?
No.
You would feel the same way. I mean, unless you have absolutely no love for animals whatsoever, that animal will blow you away. And it still gives me chills right now even thinking about her. And we love her, and I just wish the people involved with this plan would listen to the people who know her best. And they're not. They're not listening to the people who know her best. The people that know her best know what she's like and know that this is an ill-fated plan, and it's too bad. She doesn't deserve it. After all she's done, she's entertained millions of people. She's probably the reason, along with SeaWorld killer whales, why people care about killer whales. Because way back when, there was no social media, there was no YouTube. You had to go to Seattle to find a whale. She taught us all about killer whales, and that's why everybody loves her so much. We love her so much because we know her. We've known her for 30 years. So I just think, you know, to put her through something like that kind of stress that will kill her is just not fair. It's not right. It's cruel, actually, to do that to her.
I'm curious on your opinion about the cultural element of this. You know, the tribe, the Lummi tribe from that area has been fighting for her release, and they call her, you know, their relative according to their beliefs. How should something like that play into the welfare of an animal? It's such an interesting issue because, you know, medical, you have the science behind what could happen to her, but then you have doing right by this community that has been taken advantage of for a long time, and, you know, they have some rights as well. What are your thoughts?
It's an interesting issue, and it's a slippery slope, as you can imagine, and I try to just think about what's best for Toki. Simple as that. I've read a bit about it. I'm not an expert on that subject. I understand where they're coming from. I respect it, but I want what's best for Toki, and I don't want to see her die and suffer. She's going to suffer with this plan. Keiko suffered, and I think anybody that cares about animals, anybody that knows that well, anybody that wants to do the right thing, I would hope would not want her to suffer and die. So, and I don't believe she's suffering where she is. She's going to die. We all die someday, but that's her home, and that's where I'd like to see her live the rest of her life.
How long do you think she could live there?
There's no telling. I'm surprised she's still around 60 years. And you say there, I don't think it has anything to do with the pool. It's her. She's a healthy whale. She's been well cared for her whole life here. She's had better medical care, and I could say that as her veterinarian, than most people. There's no holds barred on what she needs. Whatever she needs medically, she gets. And but yeah, that's like saying how long are you and I going to live? There's no way to know. She's old though. I was joking the other day with somebody because there's some reports about orcas living to 90 years old. Now, I just read there's a 116-year-old human living right now. I think people have lived to close to 120. There's 2 people in the world over 110 years old. That doesn't mean 80 isn't geriatric, if that makes sense. So even though there's whales that'll live to 90, 60's pretty old. So she may have just a few years. Who knows? Is she going to live to 90? I don't think anybody can tell you that.
I guess last question, what do you think is behind this push to release her? Is it political? Is it just the times that we live in with kind of a blackfish and that kind of backlash?
I'd like to think that everybody involved thinks they're doing the right thing. I'd like to think that everybody truly does care for her, but they're misinformed and they don't know her and they're not listening to the people that do know her. So sure, there's politics, there's a lot of other things involved, but I don't think they're bad people that are behind this. I think they think they're doing what's right. And I'm glad, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about this because I think they're just misinformed and they're not listening to the people that really know her. I've known her for 30 years. There are trainers you're going to talk to, staff that worked here before that have known her for that long. We haven't been called once about this plan. not once, not once. No, not even input, requested, nothing.
You were an independent vet for her recently, and you said you kind of resigned from that position. Tell me about what point did it get to where you felt you could no longer be a part of this?
It was very quick. I was hired. I do marine mammal consulting because I've been doing it for 30 years. So I help out younger veterinarians, veterinarians that have less experience than I do, because there's not a lot of us around that have done it for 30 years. So I was hired to come in and help teach the vets and be sort of a mentor and help out in that way. And I was happy to do that. I want to help the animals, Toki and all the other animals at Seaquarium. The day of the news conference when they announced this, I resigned 5 minutes later.
Wow. So not long ago,
No.
weeks ago.
No, I don't want to be involved in a company that is doing this plan, made that decision. So, and again, maybe they think they're doing the right thing, but I disagree and I don't want to be involved.